What had happened was every day that I walked to school, I had a bully at my bus stop when I was 8. And at first it just started with, being mean, just normal bully stuff. And then it led to me getting punched in the face. So waiting for my bus to go to school at the end of my street, getting punched in the face every day, being worried and scared that I was going to get hit, didn't know what to do about it. I mean, who really knows how to defend yourself at 8 years old? Who knows how to scream at your bully and tell them to beat it? Welcome to Beyond the Black Belts podcast. I'm Megan Cotterill. I'm the owner of 5 Elements Martial Arts in Calgary, Alberta, and I'm the Team Canada president for the World Kickboxing and Karate Union. Welcome to the podcast today. So our topic is the importance of telling your story. I'm really nervous to start to talk about this, and I think I've been afraid for a long time to even begin the process of what this means and what it feels like, because putting yourself out to the world is absolutely terrifying. And I've realized throughout time, I think ever since I was little, is judgment has always weighed really heavily on me. And I've always taken it really personally when I've offended someone or haven't been able to communicate properly, or thought the topics that I was going to talk about were completely stupid and irrelevant and didn't make sense to anyone, and that no one would even listen to me. But I've decided that the best thing for me and the things that I've learned in this journey is just to start sharing and telling my story. So I think we might start a little bit at the beginning. So we're going to talk about just my story in martial arts. So why I started and what led everything to now and where I am now. If you like my podcast, I would be honored if you would share Beyond the Black Belts podcast, or like, or share a comment. So I'm going to start at the beginning of my story as a martial artist and what led me to where I am now. So I started doing martial arts at the age of 8 years old. I was involved in other sports when I was younger, but I never really felt like it fit, or I fit, or my body fit, or my lack of focus would get me anywhere in any of the sports I ever tried to do. I love swimming. I loved co-ed more than I loved sink or swimming because I was the tallest, the most awkward. I had no flexibility or agility. My body type was different. Gosh, I think I was at least a foot taller than all the other girls that I ever swam with. And gymnastics and ballet didn't work out so well either. I think there's a picture of me at 6 years old with my arms crossed in the corner, refusing to participate in my dance class because I absolutely hated it. And I was terrible and I was embarrassed. And I think I was tripping over both my feet constantly. So what had happened was every day that I walked to school, I had a bully at my bus stop when I was 8. And at first it just started with, being mean, just normal bully stuff. And then it led to me getting punched in the face. So waiting for my bus to go to school at the end of my street, getting punched in the face every day, being worried and scared that I was going to get hit, didn't know what to do about it. I mean, who really knows how to defend yourself at 8 years old? Who knows how to scream at your bully and tell them to beat it? At only 8 years old, like, you're just a baby. I look at my son, and 8 years old, he was just a baby. You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of conflict. So there was a martial arts place that I could walk to when I was younger. And the best part was that Karate Kid was my favorite movie of all time. And I saw it when I was 8 years old, and I totally wanted to be Daniel LaRusso. And I wanted to be able to punch and kick and do all that great stuff and learn how to block and learn how to defend myself and stick up for myself and feel confident and have permission in order to even do that, because permission was such a huge deal. I mean, you're not supposed to hit anyone. You're not supposed to retaliate. You're supposed to be a good girl. And that's all I ever wanted to be. So oddly enough, Dan DeLaRusso, his whole martial arts journey was taking karate at a YMCA. Well, that's exactly where I first started my karate journey, was in a concrete basement with giant pillars at a YMCA. And I started with Goju-Ryu Karate, and I was the only girl. And I had a really kind, really empathetic coach who told me that if I worked hard enough and I didn't give up and I was determined and I was patient more with myself, that I would be able to test one day and maybe spar one day and be able to lead the class. Like even stretch was a huge deal. Like being a leader meant a lot to me. So I started with that journey and I loved it. It was the only thing that made me feel good. And I looked forward to doing it after school as much as possible. I wanted to practice. I started realizing that protecting myself made me feel like a superhero in other areas of my life. And I started to make some friends. But the dynamic was still strange. So being the only girl, even at 8 years old, I either had boys that refused to be my partner and didn't want to train with me, or I had boys that didn't like to train with me, so they'd kick me extra hard, they'd punch me extra hard, they'd make fun of me, they'd call me out for absolutely sucking. And if I could keep my tears in and I could continue doing knuckle push-ups and punching 2x4s, because back in 1988, that's sort of what our training looked like. There was no padding, there was no mouth guard, there was no Olympic mats, there was just a concrete basement with pillars and punching a 2x4 in a stand that was wrapped with hockey tape. So that journey continued and I didn't give up. And eventually I started progressing in my belts and I started to lead the class and I started to feel more confident, and the bullying at my bus stop started to get less and less until it stopped. And I was able to defend myself because the confidence that I felt knowing that I was good at something and having permission to be good at something, especially if I knew I wasn't a natural and I wasn't talented, I could just work hard and make up that time and figure out ways around problem solving, my lack of flexibility and coordination and my sore knees and my awkward height and my joints not really working properly, then maybe I could do that in other areas of my life. So my instructor, when I was a brown belt, ended up leaving and going to the States to become a doctor, and I was kind of devastated. And so I found other martial arts through just trying to see what was in my community and what was close and how I could get there and how I could pay for it by myself, and what chores I could do in the community, raking leaves and mowing lawns and babysitting and doing whatever I could to still be able to continue my martial arts training. So I dabbled in Hapkido and Kung Fu. I did really well in Kung Fu. I got up to Red Sash in Kung Fu. And then I was able to find a community center where I could start my Shotokan karate journey again. And I had a female coach for the first time, and there was other females in the class. And I was a teenager and I talked way too much and I had a bit of an attitude, and she seemed to not be negatively swayed by my sass and the fact that all I wanted to do was connect with people in the class and make friends and feel good about myself and not feel like an outcast. I did feel like an outcast in school a lot, and I was definitely different, and I was never popular and never really included. If I had one or two friends, life was pretty good. But martial arts made me feel like I was part of a community. And so I progressed, and with the help of this coach, she got me to my black belt, and she helped me open up my first satellite school. And that led to pursuing higher black belts and going into things like Taekwondo and kickboxing and Muay Thai and starting with jiu-jitsu. And it started the beginning of the rest of my life because someone gave me an opportunity, saw that I needed it, helped me to get to my classes, helped me to pay for it, washed my uniform when I couldn't, made me a sandwich because I hadn't eaten all day, and really took a shine to what she saw in me and how it improved me as a human and how it improved my confidence and how much I loved teaching and how much I loved giving everybody what I wished I would have had when I was younger. So through this satellite school, I was able to start the first preschool program when I was, 16, 17. And it was the first time 3, 4, and 5-year-olds had ever been taught martial arts in our city. And I loved it because they were hilarious. And I felt like if I could teach them, I could teach anybody. And it made me feel like I had so much more worth and value and purpose in my life. So I continued and I didn't give up. And then I opened up 5 Elements Martial Arts 19 years ago. And I had been teaching Taekwondo, I'd been teaching karate, I'd had my own space, my own studio, I taught for other places. And I didn't align with what I saw in the community. There was so many talented instructors and so many martial artists that were naturals, and I never was, that I didn't know where anybody that wasn't traditional could ever fit in and ever learn and ever have the opportunities not to struggle so hard. I watched so many coaches kick students out of their clubs and out of their classes. I watched so many of these coaches talk to parents and say, yeah, your kid's not a good fit here. I don't think they're learning the curriculum. I don't think they're good for the program. And all it was because potentially they were special needs or they had ADHD, very much like I did. They just needed a different style of learning, and one that wasn't so harsh all the time. Like, there was such a lack of empathy and patience and unorthodox teaching. Like, there was one way of teaching and it only really fit one type of student. And if you weren't able to figure that out for yourself, or even have the patience to last, even, because it's a lot of abuse that I watched and what I took growing up in the martial arts community and having these different instructors. I mean, if you had to pee in the middle of class, you peed your pants. There was no leaving the class. If someone punched you in the face and didn't have control and there was excessive contact, too bad, suck it up, get the blood off your face and don't cry. If you were up against someone that was twice your size, you were expected to be twice as tough. Those lessons definitely shaped me and made me the martial artist that I am, and especially the competitor I am. But it was not the right way to learn martial arts. And it wasn't the right fundamentals. And it wasn't the way that the philosophy of why people start learning martial arts was supposed to continue. So that has led me to what I've created today, and how it's pushed me into competition, how it's pushed me into growing my business, how it's pushed finding new and different ways to coach students. Why I work with special needs kids is because I think we all have the right and the permission to be martial artists and to be black belts and to be coaches and to be leaders. And sometimes that doesn't always look a certain way. And I think that starting to share the story of that might help other coaches and other people to think differently about their industry and what they want to do for their community and how they want to be different and think outside the box and be more creative. I have learned a lot from starting to tell my story, mostly because I never told it. Growing up, I never told it to anyone. I put my head down and kept learning and kept doing my best. And I thought, if I kept my mouth shut and just continued to achieve, I would never have to tell any of the bad stuff or any of the things that happened. And I could just be tough enough and modest enough and humble enough, because as a martial artist, that's all I wanted to be. And so I didn't think it was important to share until it was. So as I continued to repress the things that had happened to me in the martial arts community, my mental health significantly lowered. I don't even know, I guess the way is my mental health suffered really terribly. I had extreme depression. I had terrible anxiety. I had suicidal thoughts, and I had PTSD. And I couldn't repress it anymore. It was starting to come out in my body. I had a bad eating disorder. It came out in self-harm. It came out in extremely negative self-talk. But that self-talk I had heard from different coaches and instructors and teammates throughout the years. So I thought my success was because of that sort of negative thought process and negative communication that had got me to where I was. I was always thinking, I'll show them, and all the things that they think I am, I'll be the opposite, until it didn't work anymore. So I had to start taking my mental health extremely seriously. This was due to the fact that I was a mom. I had a new baby, and I thought that he deserved a lot better than what I was putting out to the world, especially inside. I wanted him to have feelings. I wanted him to feel seen and heard. I wanted him to feel connected to me, but I was so disconnected from myself and my feelings and my self-worth that there was no way that I could be a good role model for him. So I went and did some very serious counseling work. And that was when my therapist asked me to talk about what I went through. And I didn't want to. And I had all the excuses in the world. And I thought if I was charming enough or manipulative enough, that he would just give me a couple pointers and tools and everything would get better. And maybe I'd go on antidepressants and I'd be able to figure it out. And I thought if I just achieved more and business was more successful and I got more gold medals, that I would eventually feel good enough about myself where all the rest of it went away. And it was when I started to be really honest about what happened. When I started getting really honest about what I went through as a kid. Never being seen and heard, always being told that I was never good enough. I was the reason for other people's pain. I was the reason for mistakes and negativity. And if I was just better, I would cause the world a lot less pain. And then I had to start talking about the eating disorder, and I had to start talking about the self-harm. I had to start talking about the mental, physical, sexual abuse that I was going through, and the negative relationships that I was putting myself in. And the more I told my story, the more it felt like I was outside of my body, and it was someone else telling what was going on in my head on my behalf. And it took a long time. It took a long time of being honest. It took a long time of sharing details. And the more I shared my story, the more tools I got and the more lessons I learned. And the more that I was comfortable facing those topics and those things, and the more that I started to rebuild myself from just being honest with myself that it even happened. I think the lesson of giving yourself permission to actually sit in what you went through, and it doesn't matter if it was something very minor, it could have affected you terribly, or something huge. And it was also the more that I shared, the more I realized that what had happened to me wasn't normal. I didn't want to feel sorry for myself. I thought that everything I went through was normal and everybody went through it. And I was just being a huge baby about it. And I was being incredibly weak about it. And I was being a big complainer. And that if I was a better person, I could deal with it a lot more. And sharing my story and the lessons I learned from that was, no. I needed to share in order to let it go and to change what I thought about myself and to grow and to start treating myself the way I would treat a friend or the way I would treat my child or the way I would treat someone in my community that I really cared about. And those were incredibly painful lessons, but lessons that I will never take back. And it helped me get my mental health in order. It helped me get my physical health in order. And it helped me to connect to my son. And now people in my life, I hope I can give permission to them to tell their story. And I can give them permission to share their feelings. And I can give them permission to talk about having a bad day or feeling like they weren't normal or feeling like what happened to them was awful and they got a chance to feel seen and heard for the first time. And that validation means everything. And I think it's a huge way to start healing in general. So guys, if you're liking this podcast, don't be afraid to share it, like it, send it to a friend. So through telling my story, I got some really amazing connections. And this was incredibly surprising to me because a lot of people feel embarrassed about telling their story, especially me, and afraid to have other people hear it. I mean, it's pretty vulnerable and it's pretty raw and people get to see your insides. So it's much harder to wear a mask and put on lipstick when you're telling like the most vulnerable parts of yourself to other people. But what I learned from it was a lot of people that I admired, especially in the community that I put on a huge pedestal and completely fangirled over, I learned that they went through some similar traumas and they went through some similar situations, and connecting with them ended up being such a valuable piece of how I was able to grow through all of this and get to where I am now. And the connections that I made, instead of it costing me people and friends and respect, it gained me mentorship. It gained me an awful lot more tools and resources where I can call these extremely successful people in all areas of their life and say, how did you deal with this? Or are you scared about this? Or, hey, I'm really stuck and I don't know what to do. What would you recommend that I do? Or can I just talk to you for a few minutes and get some confirmation that I'm not completely screwing up everything I'm trying to do right now, because you understand that place of constantly wanting acceptance and constantly wanting achievement and constantly wanting more growth, and that you don't often reflect on where you came, but where you want to go. And those connections led me to best friends. They led me to extremely amazing traveling experiences. It led me to charities that are so close to my heart because I actually feel like I can make a difference in the world and be able to help people in ways I wished I was helped or listened to or had validation or had a community where I didn't feel like an outsider or excluded all the time. And those connections were everything. So I would completely recommend that find that village, find those people that you can absolutely connect with, and share the bits of you that are the most raw and the most hurt, and the ones that you might be embarrassed about. It might actually end up being your strength and not the things that define you or the things that make you less whole. So if you can relate to the feels that I've been sharing and a little bit of the topic that I'm sharing, I would hugely encourage you to be brave enough to tell your story too. It doesn't have to be public like this on a podcast. It can actually be just with a friend, sometimes even a stranger. It can be someone that you admire. It can be, a family member. You don't have to be ashamed or embarrassed of your feelings. And also, your mental health is really important, and your health and your healing is really important, and how you show up to the world is really important. How you show up to your friends and your kids and your job and your community and things that are important to you, it matters. And if sharing your story helps you to take off those layers of what you're projecting to the world and just be yourself, I mean, it's the scariest thing in the world, but I found it to be the most delicious and the most amazing and the most deeply meaningful to be able to feel not so alone in the world. Feeling alone is the worst. And when you're harboring all of that all to yourself, no one can take it off your plate. No one can disperse it for you. If it's just kept in a jar, it stays there. So open up that jar and let it all out and feel a little bit lighter. So thanks for tuning in to Beyond the Black Belts podcast. If you would like to follow me, I'm on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. See you at the next episode.